What's going on, guys? This is Joe Young coming at you another video for the week. So let's start off the week with some questions here. I wanted to branch out and pull some questions also from forums and also from Facebook. I'm in a lot of different places and I see a lot of questions. So I want to kind of share my opinions and my thoughts on some of the topics that people tend to ask in some of these forums. The first question goes to Joseph Tim. He says, we're setting up a 55-gallon tank and I was wondering about the best way to get a good set of angelfish. So, and he goes on and says, you know, should I get them from different sources or not? Males, females. I guess this really depends on your end goal. Are you trying to breed them? Or are you not trying to? Obviously, if you're trying to breed them, you don't want to, you know, interbreed too much. So you probably want to get different gene pools. If you're not breeding them and, you know, you're just having them in a community tank or just a tank, you know, with just angelfish just to have, I think, you know, you can definitely just get them all from the same source. I wouldn't, you know, stress it that bad. But if you're trying to breed them, maybe, you know, get a couple of them from one source, get a couple of them from another source is probably your best bet. Question number 2, Sarah Allison asks, what's the best ick treatment? So in order to treat ick, you gotta have to know the life cycle of ick. So pretty much when you see white spots on the fish, that is symptoms of ick. And when you actually treat the tank for ick with white spots on the fish, that's not going to be effective at all. You actually have to wait until the white spots disappear on the fish, then treat the tank, and that's how you actually eliminate and kill ick, because that's when they're most vulnerable. Now, a lot of people will tell you to increase the temperatures of the tank, and yes, this will help speed up the life cycle of the ick. My suggestion would be actually using chemical treatment to actually kill and remove most of the ick once it drops off of the fish. If you like to use copper, I would highly recommend using copper, but obviously copper is, you know, really deadly to certain things, so you got to pay attention to that. So if you have corals, for example, that'll kill them. If it's just fish only, and that would be perfect. If you have snails and whatnot, invertebrates, that would definitely kill them as well. So you got to be really careful when you're using copper, but copper is really effective in terms of treating for ick and actually killing that. If you don't want to use that, you can use other over-the-counter medicines that will do just fine. All right, so let's get into this week's update. So this week I am going to be finishing up the rack system outside. So last week I only had 1-day weekend, so I couldn't really do much, but I was able to tear down 2 of the tanks, removing a bunch of live sands, rocks, etc., draining the tank, wiping down what I could, and kind of letting it dry. So this week, the tanks are pretty much dry, you know, for the whole week you're sitting there. So really just scraping the algae off the tank, rinsing that off, and filling it up slightly, and then kind of draining as much as I can, and also vacuuming a lot of the sand that kind of was along the walls. So once I had that all done, I went ahead and added a small portion of fertilizer on the bottom, and then I went ahead and threw in some substrate. For this build, I've had really good success with EcoComplete mixed with ADA. So what I did was I used 2 bags of EcoComplete to make a thin layer on the bottom there. And then on top of that, I went ahead and used ADA to top that off. And I also used 2 bags of ADA here. Now the EcoComplete really doesn't have the nutrients in the soil. What it is it's really porous, and it is really good to house beneficial bacteria in the actual rocks there. And it's a good substrate in the bottom for the roots to kind of grab onto. And actually that's why I ended up using EcoComplete, because it's really a filler substrate layer in the bottom. I didn't want to, you know, burn through so much money with just buying a bunch of ADA when, you know, a couple years down the road you'll end up having to replace the ADA substrate anyways. So once I had the substrate into the tank, I went ahead and filled up all the tanks. Now this whole process took hours, and obviously you guys are only seeing it in a few minutes, but you know, cleaning the whole tank, putting the substrate in and filling it up, it took quite some time. So once I had that all rigged up, I went ahead and powered up the sump. Now in the previous video I did mention that one of the tanks I needed to set up for quarantine, and it's already set up for quarantine. I'll share what I got in a future video. I don't want to really jinx the fish, you know, I just got them. I want to make sure they're okay before showing you guys, but you know, I'll definitely show them in the future once they're healthy, eating, and coloring up a little bit more. So the bottom tank of the rack isn't hooked up to anything, it's running separately. So I had to plumb a new drain line to the sump directly from the top tank, and it was really easy. I had, you know, a bunch of PVC pipes just laying around. Just made a cut, glued it together, and I have a new drain. Since the tank's so big and also I have so much substrate actually in the system, it's probably going to take a month and a half to cycle. So I'll let it do its thing and cycle. But I'll probably check in maybe 2 weeks later just to see where the cycle process is at. So the rack setup is pretty much set up. I just need to pick up some LEDs and then really throw in some plants to actually get that kick started. I'll probably do that next week. I'm not in a rush to throw plants and actually start that tank up with LEDs. The tank's gonna take a while to cycle anyway, so I'll let it do its thing. So before we end the video, I wanted to show you guys what I'm quarantining in my current quarantine tank. Not the new one, but the old one. I picked up some more Plecos for obvious reasons. I'm converting that rack into a Pleco tank. So I did pick up some new Plecos. Now I picked up a bunch of bristlenose Plecos. So the first one is a Rio Paraguay bristlenose Pleco. These guys are awesome. I've seen them in the past. Now these guys remind me of the Selfin Plecos with the red and black leopard patterns. The only difference here is they're actually a bristlenose version of that. They're smaller and they don't get as big. Now I picked up a few of these guys. They're really small right now. They have some time to grow in and actually fatten up, but looking at some of these little guys right now, the color patterns on these guys are amazing. I hope that they can grow and show a lot more of these patterns. Another one in this tank is the L306 Pleco. These guys are very similar to the L397 Plecos, the red tiger Plecos. The only difference here is the actual long bands that they have on their body extends all the way to the head, versus the L397. They have a smaller, almost thin stripe patterns on their head, and their body looks pretty much similar to the 306 Plecos. I was only able to pick up like a few of these guys. One of them did end up dying, unfortunately, through the quarantine process. Now these guys are finishing up the quarantine process. I would say maybe another week or so they'll be ready to be placed into any of the tanks. I'm gonna wait until I can free up some room here before I actually place some of these guys into different tanks. So moving on to the next tank here, I picked up some albino bristlenose. These are the blue-eyed versions of them. The blue eyes are really nice. They're tiny right now, super tiny. So they got some ways to grow. So also in the tank, I picked up some green dragon bristlenose Plecos. These guys are also very, very tiny, but I'm looking forward to seeing these guys grow up and eventually adding them to some bigger tanks. Alright guys, and that is the update for the week. I hope you guys enjoyed this week's update. If you guys aren't subscribed yet, make sure you guys are subscribed. And like always, until next time guys, peace.